Welcome back to another episode of Women Murder Wednesday, the series where we dive deep into crimes of passion, betrayal, and chilling true stories of women who crossed the line into murder. Today, we're unraveling a case that rocked the military community and left many questioning how love could turn so deadly. This is the story of Kemia Hassel, a woman whose forbidden affair led to a calculated and brutal assassination of her own husband, Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III. A young life lost, a family shattered, and a betrayal that unfolded in cold blood. Kemia Hassel seemed to have it all. A young mother and a U.S. Army soldier, she was married to 23-year-old Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III. Tyrone was everything you'd expect from a rising military star: disciplined, respected, and a loving father. The couple met in the Army and were stationed together at Fort Stewart in Georgia, sharing not just a profession, but also a toddler son. But behind the social media smiles and family portraits, there were cracks in the facade. Kemia wasn't happy in her marriage. While Tyrone was often deployed or busy with military duties, Kemia grew distant, disillusioned, and soon found comfort in the arms of another man, fellow soldier, Jeremy Cuellar. Kemia's affair with Jeremy Cuellar started in 2018 while both were stationed at Fort Stewart. What began as a flirtation quickly escalated into a full-blown romance. Friends and colleagues noticed the chemistry between them, but no one suspected just how far they would go to be together. What makes this case even more disturbing is that the couple didn't just dream of a life together, they plotted to eliminate the obstacle standing in their way. Tyrone Hassel. Using encrypted messaging apps and careful planning, Kemia and Jeremy concocted a chilling scheme. Their goal? To murder Tyrone, collect his military benefits, and finally live their lives without secrecy or restraint. New Year's Eve, 2018. Tyrone Hassel was home on leave in St. Joseph Township, Michigan, visiting family with Kemia and their child. It was supposed to be a time of celebration, but Kemia had something far more sinister in mind. On the night of December 31st, Tyrone had spent the evening delivering food to Kemia at a nearby residence. After dropping off dinner, he returned to his father's house, unaware that Jeremy Cuellar was lurking nearby, armed and ready. As Tyrone exited his truck, Jeremy ambushed him, shooting him multiple times. Tyrone died at the scene, just steps away from his family home. The assassination was swift, cold, and devastating. The initial investigation suggested a random act of violence, a tragic robbery gone wrong, but investigators quickly sensed that something was off. Tyrone's father, a former police officer, suspected that his son's murder was personal, not random. Surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic evidence began to unravel the truth. Detectives soon discovered a digital trail of messages between Kemia and Jeremy, outlining their plot in chilling detail. From discussing logistics to choosing the best time to strike, their communication left no doubt. This was premeditated murder. In January 2019, Kemia was arrested. Initially, she denied any involvement, but faced with mounting evidence, she cracked, confessing to the entire plot. Jeremy was arrested soon after in Illinois, where he had fled following the murder. Kemia's trial was held in August 2019 and quickly became a media sensation. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a woman driven by selfish desire, willing to orchestrate the death of her husband for love and money. They highlighted her cold demeanor and lack of remorse. Kemia's own words sealed her fate. Her confession detailed how she manipulated Jeremy, keeping him on a string of promises that their future together depended on Tyrone's death. The defense tried to argue that Kemia had been coerced, portraying Jeremy as the mastermind, but the jury wasn't convinced. After just over an hour of deliberation, the verdict was in: guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Kemia was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jeremy faced similar charges and in a separate trial also received a life sentence. The Hassel family was left to raise Tyrone's young son, who is now growing up without his father. they continue to honor Tyrone's legacy, remembering him not as a victim, but as a hero, a father, and a man who served his country with pride. As for Kemia, she remains behind bars, serving a life sentence for the crime that shattered so many lives. The story of Krystal Lee Kenney and her involvement in the murder of Kelsey Barrett, a young mother whose disappearance and death captivated the nation. How far would you go for love? For Krystal, the answer is as dark as it gets. Kelsey Barrett was a 29-year-old flight instructor and loving mother living in Woodland Park, Colorado. In 2018, she was engaged to Patrick Frazee, a local rancher and the father of her 1-year-old daughter. On the surface, they seemed like a normal couple, building a life together. But beneath the calm exterior, there were cracks. Patrick was leading a double life. Enter Krystal Lee Kenney, a 32-year-old nurse from Idaho and Patrick's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Krystal and Patrick had known each other for years, dating before he became engaged to Kelsey. Despite knowing about Kelsey, and even about the baby, Krystal stayed entangled in Patrick's web of lies and manipulation. The story takes a sinister turn in late 2018. According to Krystal's own testimony, Patrick began pressuring her to help him eliminate Kelsey. Shockingly, Krystal admitted that Patrick asked her 3 separate times to kill Kelsey herself. He suggested gruesome methods, poisoning her coffee, bludgeoning her, and even luring her into an ambush. Krystal claimed she couldn't bring herself to do it, but she didn't report Patrick either. Instead, Krystal continued her secret relationship with Patrick, keeping silent as his plans escalated. Whether out of fear, love, or manipulation, or a toxic mix of all 3, Krystal became complicit in ways that would haunt her forever. On November 22nd, 2018, Thanksgiving Day, Patrick Frazee carried out his brutal plan. He lured Kelsey to her own townhouse under the pretense of handing over their daughter. Once inside, Patrick bludgeoned Kelsey to death with a baseball bat, while their toddler was reportedly in another room. The crime was horrifyingly premeditated. Patrick brought a tote to transport Kelsey's body and worked meticulously to clean up evidence. Patrick called Krystal after the murder and told her she had a mess to clean up, and she complied. Krystal traveled from Idaho to Colorado, arriving at Kelsey's townhouse days after the murder. What she walked into was something out of a nightmare. Blood-spattered walls, floors, and even baby toys. A gruesome scene of unimaginable violence. Armed with gloves, bleach, and determination, Krystal spent hours scrubbing and sanitizing the crime scene, even though she knew exactly what had happened. She later testified that she disposed of blood-soaked evidence, including curtains and children's items, leaving no trace of the horror that had occurred, at least not to the naked eye. Krystal also helped Patrick burn Kelsey's body and personal belongings on his ranch in a desperate attempt to erase all evidence of the crime. The level of her involvement was chilling, to say the least. Kelsey's disappearance quickly became national news. Her family, frantic and heartbroken, reported her missing when she failed to answer calls or texts. Law enforcement sprang into action, launching a large-scale search across Colorado and beyond. Digital forensics became key. Phone records showed suspicious activity, including texts from Kelsey's phone after her disappearance, texts that authorities would later discover were sent by Krystal in an effort to make it appear as if Kelsey was alive and well. The investigation tightened around Patrick, and Krystal's involvement unraveled when she was confronted by authorities. Faced with overwhelming evidence and perhaps her own conscience, Krystal agreed to a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against Patrick. Patrick Frazee's trial took place in late 2019. Krystal was the star witness, offering a chilling insider's view of the murder and cover-up. Her detailed testimony was crucial in securing Patrick's conviction. Krystal described in horrifying detail the cleanup, the burning of Kelsey's remains, and the way Patrick manipulated and controlled her throughout the ordeal. The defense tried to undermine Krystal's credibility, painting her as a willing participant who only came clean to save herself. But the jury found the evidence backed Krystal's admissions and digital trails overwhelming. Patrick was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 156 years for additional charges. Krystal, as part of her plea deal, pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, a sentence many viewed as far too lenient given the horror of her involvement. The case sparked fierce public debate about Krystal's role. Was she a victim of manipulation, or was she an active participant who deserved harsher punishment? Many legal experts argued that without Krystal's cooperation, securing Patrick's conviction might have been far more difficult. Kelsey Barrett's family continues to mourn the loss of their beloved daughter and fights to keep her memory alive. Their focus remains on raising Kelsey's young daughter, who is now growing up without her mother but surrounded by loving grandparents.
Nicole Nachtman, a quiet Florida college student who brutally murdered her own mother and stepfather in 2015. This case is about more than just murder. It's about mental health, family dysfunction, and the terrifying descent into darkness that no one saw coming until it was too late. Nicole Nachtman was born into what looked from the outside like a successful family. Her mother, Michelle Triplett, was a captain in the U.S. Navy Reserve and worked as a school administrator. Nicole was an honor student, talented in the arts, and had recently started attending Florida State University. But behind closed doors, Nicole's life was far from stable. Court testimony later painted a bleak picture of her home life. She described her mother as controlling, emotionally abusive, and prone to manipulation. Nicole had no relationship with her biological father, and her stepfather, Robert Deans, himself a retired Marine, was viewed as intimidating and authoritarian. Nicole was isolated. She had no friends on campus, and her social skills were underdeveloped. Her only refuge, it seemed, was her own imagination, often escaping into elaborate fictional worlds and fantasy stories that blurred the line between fiction and reality. In the summer of 2015, Nicole was preparing to return to Florida State University after visiting home in Tampa. But she was hiding a terrible secret. She hadn't registered for classes, hadn't paid for housing, and had essentially been withdrawn from college without her mother's knowledge. According to prosecutors, Nicole feared her mother's reaction when the truth inevitably came out. She believed Michelle would be furious, and in her mind, this fear grew into something catastrophic. On August 18th, Nicole rented a car and drove nearly 300 miles from Tallahassee to her family home in Carrollwood. She claimed it was a surprise visit, but in reality, it was the beginning of a calculated and terrifying plan. What happened next would shock an entire community. Nicole waited until nightfall when her stepfather returned home. According to prosecutors, she shot Robert Deans in the upper body, possibly ambushing him as he entered or exited his vehicle. He managed to crawl a few feet toward the home before collapsing near the front door. The next night, August 19th, Nicole waited for her mother to return from work. Armed with the same weapon, she entered the home and shot Michelle Triplett inside her bedroom. Prosecutors believe Nicole then tried to stage the scene to make it look like a break-in. She even called 911 herself the next morning, pretending to have just discovered the crime scene while coming home from college. But her story didn't add up. Forensic evidence quickly contradicted her claims. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables stolen, no suspects seen entering or leaving the home except one, Nicole. Neighbors had seen her car at the house in the days leading up to the murders. Surveillance cameras showed inconsistencies in her timeline. And the most damning evidence? Gunshot residue found on Nicole's belongings, as well as text messages and Google searches suggesting she had planned to get rid of her parents. Detectives also uncovered surveillance video of Nicole acting strangely on campus, talking to herself, laughing uncontrollably, and appearing visibly disoriented. Nicole Nachtman was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her trial began in 2019 and was emotionally charged from start to finish. The prosecution argued that Nicole was manipulative, deceitful, and calculated. They said she killed to avoid the consequences of her lies and to escape her mother's control. The defense, however, painted a drastically different picture. Nicole was not a monster. They said she was a victim, a young woman with untreated mental illness, severe trauma, and an abusive upbringing. They claimed she suffered from schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder that impacted her ability to tell right from wrong. Her defense attorney described years of psychological torment that pushed her to the edge. Mental health experts testified that Nicole showed signs of delusional thinking and paranoia. They pointed to her bizarre behavior after the murders, sleeping in a dorm lounge, talking to imaginary people, and completely failing to comprehend the consequences of her actions. After a week of testimony and nearly 12 hours of deliberations, the jury found Nicole Nachtman guilty of both murders. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Nicole showed little emotion. Some believed this was another sign of her instability. Others saw it as cold indifference. Her defense team expressed disappointment, arguing she should have been committed to a psychiatric facility, not a prison. But for the families of Michelle Triplett and Robert Deans, the verdict brought closure, though certainly not peace. Thank you for joining me for this week's Women Murder Wednesday. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more true crime stories every week. And remember, behind every headline is a woman with a story.